Ladies and gentlemen, this is huge, and we're already seeing the benefits in North Carolina. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. This is a story that is going to really be one of the greatest accomplishments of President Trump. This is MSNBC, and hit subscribe right now. Your super chat is greatly appreciated. You will hear President Trump in a second. You will hear what's going on in North Carolina and how 65,000 people are going to have to prove citizenship that they can vote in North Carolina. I think this has a lot to do with President Trump's executive order. Now, this is MSNBC, not The Onion. New Trump order requires proof of citizenship to register to vote. So what exactly does this mean? So what exactly does this mean? It means exactly what it says. What on earth is wrong with proving that you're eligible to choose a candidate within a contest inside the United States of America? What on earth? How far have we gone? How absurd have things become? Where a headline in a major station, MSNBC, new Trump order requires proof of citizenship to register to vote. So what exactly does this mean? Why would that be difficult to understand in any way, shape, or form? Hit subscribe to this channel right now. Let's get to the president's executive order, and then we'll get to what's taking place in North Carolina with the Republican poised for victory. And you'll hear more about everything going on there.
Well, on the campaign trail, President Trump promised if he won, voters would have to prove they were American citizens in order to vote.
And I will secure our elections. And by the way, our goal on election will be one-day voting with paper ballots, proof of citizenship, and voter ID. It's very simple.
Well, he just kept that promise. Trump signed an executive order that now will require proof of American citizenship when you register to vote in federal elections.
Lastly, sir, we have an executive order for your attention on the very important subject of election integrity. This is going to cut down on illegal immigrants on the voter rolls, ensure that the Department of Homeland Security and the data that they have available is being fully weaponized to ensure that illegal immigrants aren't voting. This will include a citizenship question on the federal voting form for the first time.
There are other steps that we will be taking in the coming weeks, and we think we'll be able to end up getting fair elections. Perhaps some people think I shouldn't be complaining because we won in a landslide, but we got to straighten out our election, and it's an honor to sign this one. To sign all of them, but to sign this one is a great honor.
A sacred
So you're already seeing 65,000 people having to prove they're eligible in North Carolina, which could easily give the Republican who at first lost possibly by 700 or so, but we have now a whole new contest. The Republican could actually become the state Supreme Court justice. That would be very good for the state for a number of reasons. We saw how Democrats reacted after Helene in North Carolina. But hit subscribe to this channel. This is huge, ladies and gentlemen, and you'll get to the North Carolina contest in a second. We'll talk about the analysis there in a second.
Impact, Lawrence, to protect election integrity and ensure fair elections, as the president just said.
Well, I think it's about election integrity, and it's also just about the whole case of the people that are here legally in this country and the people that are here illegally. When it comes to this issue, I think this is the issue that Democrats, you just have to concede to the president. Anytime it is about protecting American citizens when it comes to whether it's voter integrity or when it comes to protecting American citizens when it comes to the illegals that have committed crimes here in this country, you just got to give it over to the president because he's winning on this issue at every single corner. And look, there are policy debates that you can have in this country. You can debate pathways to citizenship and all of that. But when it comes to part of being an American is that right to vote, to be able to affect the democracy. And you don't want non-citizens being able to do that.
Now, do Democrats want people who are not eligible to choose Democratic candidates? That's the first question. The second question is, have Democrats won local, state, or federal contests with individuals who are not allowed by laws that Democrats also passed and were a part of signing legislation? Have there been Democrats that actually won local, state, or federal contests with the help of a number of individuals that were not eligible to choose the candidate? Is that possible? Is it possible, number three, that Democrats want? Is it possible? I'm not even accusing the Democrats of anything. Is it possible that perhaps not enforcing existing border laws had to do with what Elon Musk and others, Vivek Ramaswamy and others, and President Trump and others were saying, that they want a base of support politically where close contests could be decided by 500, 600, 700, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people, individuals who perhaps are not eligible because they're not citizens? Is that possible? I'm asking if it's possible, ladies. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not even accusing Democrats of anything. I'm asking, do you think maybe if the roles were reversed and every person coming into the country voted Republican and Trump, do you think that Democrats would have a 1,000-foot-high wall, both in the southern and northern borders? Okay, and the Coast Guard in each coast would be like manned by, battleships and warships, okay? Oh, you better believe they would change their tune, just like AOC changed her tune regarding lower court judges. She was telling Biden to ignore a lower court order. Now everyone is saying, oh, no one's above the law. And then, of course, they preemptively pardoned 1 million people because nobody's above the law, except Democrats who preemptively pardon everyone around them. So this is a huge issue. You get to the North Carolina Supreme Court contest in a second. The Republican is poised to win, ladies and gentlemen, because the Democrat possibly had about 700 people, a 700-person lead, and possibly can't prove that these individuals potentially were not citizens. Possibly.
Now, there's some states and some local city councils that want them to vote in local elections. You can't have that in this country. It is a privilege. It is one that people died for. You know, Black Americans, even the people that came here against their will, it took 3 constitutional amendments for Black Americans to get the same rights as everyone else. So why are we just giving it away for people that did not work for it and earn that right? I think the president is going to win on this issue yet again.
And Arthel, yet many people are resisting this and there's sort of an uproar about it. But why, given how clearly Lawrence laid out the benefits of this?
Well, like Lawrence said, if you're not a citizen, you shouldn't be voting. But consider this, because it's my understanding that the IDs that will be required will be a real ID and a passport to prove your citizenship. First of all, I'm not sure that that does prove your citizenship guarantee, but also there are many Americans who don't have a passport. There are many Americans who don't have real ID because they don't get on a plane like most of us do, so they don't really need it. So just consider them as well. So how are they going to prove that they are who they are and they're legitimate?
Excellent questions to explore the execution of this, Kaylee. And you contrast that with, as Lawrence said, California doesn't even require an identification. So is this really setting a message for the next 4 years and beyond?
I think it's setting an important message. Most polling that I have seen shows overwhelming support for voter identification. I think there are things people just think, yeah, we want to know who's voting.
And let's get to what's taking place in North Carolina. This is very interesting.
Now, this latest ruling coming from a 3-judge panel on the Court of Appeals in a 2-to-1 partisan decision siding with Griffin in his case. So what does that mean? In siding with Griffin's argument, essentially if that ruling were to stand, those 65,000 voters from around North Carolina who have had their votes challenged would have to show proof of their identity or potentially have their votes thrown out. Now, because of the legal challenges, this remains right now the only uncalled race left from 2024.
So as of now, I believe Allison Riggs has a 700 or close to 800 vote lead. But the North Carolina appeals court judge ruled that over 60,000 voters need to verify their eligibility. This could easily move Jefferson Griffin to the lead, and he becomes a Supreme Court justice. This is huge, ladies and gentlemen, because for some reason, I'm not accusing Democrats of anything. For some reason, and I'm not referring to Briggs, to Allison Riggs, or to Griffin. I'm not referring to North Carolina. I'm referring nationally. For some reason, Democrats consistently oppose any effort to show identification when it comes to local, state, or federal contests. We don't know why. We have no clue why. Gee, it might be, just potentially, because Democrats benefit from an electorate within a certain part of the country or within blue states not having to prove that they're eligible to choose the candidate. You think maybe that's a possibility?
In the entire country. Now, again, that ruling in that 3-judge panel going along party lines in a 2-to-1 vote with 2 Republican judges ruling in Griffin's favor. Meanwhile, the NCGOP praising that decision, saying, quote, "For months, Judge Griffin and the NCGOP have endured baseless attacks and incendiary rhetoric in this matter. Throughout this time, our position has been consistent. When the debate is about the merits, Judge Griffin will prevail in his election integrity concerns." Meanwhile, though, Democrats criticizing the ruling, emphasizing the fact that, again, multiple recounts had confirmed that Riggs won the election.
A recount, you can have 500 trillion attempts at counting the totals over and over again till the end of eternity. If you're counting the same people and you're not asking if the individuals are eligible, you're going to get the same number. Where have we seen that before? The Democratic Party and morally superior, highly educated liberal Democrats oftentimes play these very vapid and sophomoric semantic games. Well, everything's been recounted. Well, what's the problem? Yeah, you've recounted potentially the same number of individuals who might not be eligible. Absolute genius and very highly intelligent, possibly deceptive and conniving individual.
Riggs saying she now plans to fight the decision. We just got a statement from her saying, quote, "We will be promptly appealing this deeply misinformed decision that threatens to disenfranchise more than 65,000.
Disenfranchise is the word they use, but you're not disenfranchising anyone who potentially is not eligible to be part of the process. So, the assumption, of course, is that everyone counted is, of course, eligible. This is a problem. Allison Riggs could be 100% correct. Who knows? The problem, however, is that Democrats have worked so desperately to stop any effort by President Trump Republicans to ensure that everyone who decides on a presidential or federal or state or local contest actually has the ability, is allowed by law to do so.
1,000 lawful voters and sets a dangerous precedent allowing disappointed politicians to thwart the will of the people. So this is not the last step in the process. As we just mentioned, Riggs planning to appeal that decision. So that means it would go to the state Supreme Court, where of course Riggs is also a member. She has already said she will recuse herself from that case, meaning that of the 6 justices left, 5 are Republicans and 1 a Democrat that will hear that case. From there, it could end up in federal court before this is all over. So
if you have 5 Republicans, 1 Democrat, it will obviously go in the way of Griffin. If it goes to the federal court, I mean, who knows, the federal courts. But I don't know why it would go to the federal court, though. I mean, if the state Supreme Court rules on it. But this is looking like if people cannot prove, if 65,000 people cannot prove, if individuals cannot prove that they're eligible, okay, it wouldn't take much for me or for you to prove that you're eligible. Okay, you might not necessarily need a passport, but it wouldn't take much. I'm not going to explain the ways you could prove, but there's a number of ways. But anyway, let's continue.
In the meantime, no immediate need for those 65,000 voters to have to show their ID yet. But if the ruling stands, that would be the case. If those votes were called into question, if that were to happen, there would be a time window for those voters to try and have their votes to be counted.
So this is an article in the Federal. 65,000 North Carolina voters must prove identity or have ballots thrown out in Supreme Court race. So this is the Federalist. You can type in H.A. Goodman Federalist. I'm honored to have been published a number of times in the Federalist. It's a wonderful publication. You should subscribe to it and definitely read the Federalist. Let's listen to this really quickly. This is really, really interesting what's taking place in North Carolina.
Degree case for a second to break in with this major development in the North Carolina Supreme Court election that still has yet to be decided. So this is new information from my content partner in Raleigh, WREL. Let me read you the headline. Republican Jefferson Griffin wins North Carolina Appeals Court challenge in case contesting 65,000 ballots. So let's walk this through this case. So thousands of North Carolina ballots in the 2024 election might have been counted illegally. That's according to the State Court of Appeals. That's what they ruled on today in a case that could.
So what is the rebuttal from Democrats? What on earth is the rebuttal? How would they refute this if indeed people were not eligible or were counted illegally? What is the rebuttal? No, that's not true. No, you're wrong. No, everything is fine. No, there's nothing to suggest that anyone committed any crimes. No, they always use this word. There's nothing to suggest. Yes, it's God forbid there's maybe a human being on the planet suspicious of the Democratic Party. God forbid. Or maybe there's one person that actually exists. This person obviously has a tinfoil hat. How could you ever be suspicious of such wonderful, amazing, honest, wonderful people? But anyway, what's the rebuttal? No, you're wrong. If you have to prove that you're eligible, what's the big deal? It's not that difficult to do.
Determine the outcome of last year's election for that open seat on the North Carolina Supreme Court. Again, it's the only state Supreme Court race in the country that hasn't been decided. This case is almost certain to be appealed by Riggs, Allison Riggs, and Democrats. So a spokesperson for Griffin did not immediately respond to a request for comment, and a representative for Riggs' campaign also did not respond to a request for comment when WREL reached out to them. So if this ruling stands, the State Board of Elections would be required to ask most of the voters in question to provide proof of their identity. Anyone who does not respond will have their ballot thrown out. Let me repeat that. If this ruling stands, the State Board of Elections would be required to ask most of the voters in question to provide proof of their identity. Anyone who does not respond will have their ballot thrown out. Now, the court also identified several hundred voters who it said should have their ballots thrown out no matter what, based on a new interpretation of the state constitution. The decision is perhaps the most important yet decision in a high-profile case involving Judge Jefferson Griffin, who wants more than 60,000 ballots thrown out, 65,000 to be exact. Again, he has his eyes set on that state Supreme Court seat. Now, Griffin, a Republican on the North Carolina Court of Appeals, challenged Democrat Supreme Court Justice Allison Riggs for the high court seat back in November. The big election, the presidential election back in November. They ran. Again, that's still yet to be decided. Recount showed that Riggs received 734 more votes than Griffin, but that result has yet to be made official. Again, while Griffin continues to challenge the validity of those tens of thousands of ballots. Now, the ruling in favor of Griffin from his colleagues on the appeals court came in a party line decision, as many of those previous rulings in this case. Now, again, this is a story that we've been following from the very beginning, actually, as they were running up until now. Again, I want to reiterate the headline: Republican Jefferson Griffin wins North Carolina Appeals Court challenge in a case contesting 65,000 ballots. Thousands of North Carolina ballots in the 2024 election might have been counted illegally. That's a ruling from the State Court of Appeals that came down today. This case almost certain to be appealed by.
So that is absolutely excellent analysis. Okay, WCNC, excellent analysis. And here you have appeals court judge rules in favor of tossing thousands of ballots in close North Carolina Supreme Court race. Here, Griffin's, the Carolina Journal, Griffin's latest court filing raises number of suspected never residents voters above 500. This is like, the Democrats did this to Bernie Sanders, and not one person batted an eye. Republican, they actually, and people were eligible in the Democratic primary in New York. This was in 2016. So, Republican State Supreme Court candidate Jefferson Griffin, latest court filing asserts that more than 500 people who have never lived in North Carolina or the United States voted. More than 500 people who never lived in North Carolina or the United States. Why would they vote Democrat then? Can somebody please explain why a person who never even lived in the United States of America, according to Jefferson Griffin, why would you then choose the Democrat? I'm asking a question. I'm not actually, it's rhetorical, but in nature, but I mean, I'm not accusing the Democrats of anything. I'm asking a question. 500 people who never lived in North Carolina or the United States. Griffin's lawyer says the number of never resident voters could be large enough to affect Riggs leads Griffin, and that's just never lived. There's other potential issues of just people who aren't citizens. So this is not, controversial in any way, shape, or form. Liberals should be, progressives should be, for this also, left-leaning people. If you're not, then simply pass a bill. Push a bill saying you don't need to be a citizen. Okay? But let's continue. If Democrats want to simply allow this to take place, like I said, when you have these protests, hands off this, hands off that, you can go ahead and pass a foreign aid package through Congress. Go ahead and do that. If you want to, go ahead and do that, Democrats, but they don't want to. If they think that USAID, for example, is doing good things around the world, which it is, unfortunately, it's also bundled with money that goes to non-governmental organizations, possibly political action committees, back to the Democratic Party in many creative ways. You probably shouldn't have bundled taxpayer money into USAID to then fund Democratic candidates. Okay. If Democrats, for example, want non-citizens to vote, They should simply push for legislation, not pretend that everything's okay and straddle the fence and sit on the sidelines and live their lives with plausible deniability every second. Well, there's no reason to suggest. Yes, there is. It's called suspicion. People do not trust the Democratic Party, nor is it popular. And they don't trust the Republican Party either. But Republicans are a lot more popular than Democrats now. President Trump is, not traditional Republicans, like Trump Republicans. But let's continue.
Now, look, you can debate, and the left will always say, we don't find cases of 100,000 illegal immigrants voting. But a lot of American citizens say we shouldn't have 1, 2, or 3 in our federal elections. So why not have a sacrosanct election? I think this is a very common sense executive order. All it says is you need some form of identification. Number 2, we want the Attorney General to enter into information agreement sharing with states to see if there is a case of illegal immigrant voting. And then number 3, conditioning state funds to ensure that there is some sort of voter identification. I think it's a common sense measure. Polling reflects it, and we'll see if it can be executed. It will be litigated, though. I can guarantee you that. Yeah,
that's the only gift.
Yes.
I've just got to say, I vote here in New York, right? Do you know what I do to get to the ballot? Where do you live? I give them an address. They're like, that's great. Go on. Like, there's no ID. There's no requirement, which I think is insane because the majority of Western nations require some kind of ID to vote. We know that the American population supports that. They're in favor of that. Look, I have to have an ID to get cold meds. Right? So why wouldn't I have an ID to vote? One of the most important obligations and responsibilities we have as Americans.
And interestingly, do you remember the court case in Virginia that was litigated during the campaign about those on the voter rolls who had either checked that they were citizens, but there was a discrepancy or there wasn't a valid proof? So the question I think then is presented is what penalties would there be if someone maintains such, but the passport is invalid, as you said, or they maintain and there's no proof? You know, what then? Would it be criminal repercussion? Because I think so. I think it should be. This is, to your point, is sacrosanct.
And to your point, Emily, remember when that was originally passed, it was supported by Democrats and Republicans. And then when it came back up for political purposes, then they challenged it. The right to vote, the protection of voting, is not a partisan issue. It's an American issue. And I think we're seeing this, as Kaylee reflected in the polling. The country wants America first policies. You don't want to be on the other side of that.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno.
President Trump signed including.
So the issue, ladies and gentlemen, is that President Trump's executive order is already having implications in North Carolina. It will have repercussions, positive benefits throughout the country. Consequences perhaps for the Democratic Party. There's a reason one political side possibly doesn't want potentially any verification of a person's identity when they choose in state or local, state or federal contests.
One that would require proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. He's also calling for all ballots to be received by Election Day across the country, and the executive order calls on the Election Assistance Commission to amend voting system guidelines. CBS News Justice Department correspondent Scott McFarland is in Washington. Scott, what's the significance of this executive action?
This could be profoundly important ahead of the 2026 midterm elections, which is really the next opportunity for Democrats to get back into power in part of Washington, in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. According to critics of this executive order, it is an overreach by the president into the work of local and state governments. The execution of elections is a local matter with very little federal oversight. What the executive order calls for, Lindsay, is a federal requirement for proof of citizenship by anybody who votes in a federal election. It also could call for the decertification or recertification of those voting booths in communities nationwide, a Herculean undertaking before the next election. It also would prohibit states and communities from accepting and counting ballots that arrive after Election Day itself, even if they were sent on time and even if local laws allow for that. This is on a beeline to the court system, Lindsay, for legal challenges.
And Scott, you have sources that you've talked to. How likely is it this will stand up in court?
It seems unlikely all of this is going to be accepted by all courts. In fact, the lawsuits aren't just inevitable, they could be imminent. Take a look at the comment from the Secretary of State in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, who says that the department is reviewing the action, but then makes the argument that in addition to the department being committed to executing appropriate federal laws and elections, that this appears to be an overreach by the Trump administration. That this.
Well, the question is, why would proving one's citizenship be an overreach? I mean, this is the most basic. Why are Democrats so against this? That's the question. And why are Republicans for it? So if the tables were returned and Republicans said, why do you need to know who's choosing our elected officials? Why is that important? I mean, obviously, everything's fine. I mean, if the roles were reversed and Trump benefited from millions upon millions of people potentially coming into the country without citizenship and potentially impacting the results of local, state, federal contests, what do you think Democrats would say? When Bernie Sanders in the 2016 primary was getting close to Clinton, they removed thousands, tens of thousands of votes from the primary because they said that they were not eligible. You could look it up in 2016. Democrats don't even have a functioning primary. So imagine what their views of nationwide contests are. But the question is, how is it overreach to ensure that states verify the identity or the citizenship of people voting? How on earth is that overreach? I don't get it, other than if you have some kind of nefarious or deceitful motive. I don't know any moral purpose. Democrats usually base all their decisions in life on morality. What's the moral component in preventing an inquiry into the citizenship or the eligibility of people deciding local, state, and federal contests? What is the moral component? One would think the moral component would lean towards, one would think it's very moral to ensure that your leaders are chosen by citizens who are eligible to choose those leaders. One would think that's very moral to do.
This is an extension beyond what federal legislation and what federal laws allow. An overreach, that's the word we keep hearing, but there's a more pernicious thing, Lindsay. Even if this doesn't stand up, even if this is knocked down by the courts, it starts to sow those seeds of distrust in federal elections, which ended up with violence.
This sowing the seeds of a lot of things ended up in an entire summer of property damage, billions upon billions in property damage, and it was terrible what happened. I think it was an atrocity what happened in Trump's last year in office. But the media coverage sowed the seeds, one might say, of what took place in Trump's last year in office, where you had curfews in every major city. The chaos and the violence emanated left of center, not right of center. One day in January, possibly with individuals linked to the government, according to Vivek Ramaswamy, one day that they accused Trump of helping incite, which was nonsense. Trump had every right to question results. Less than 4 years later, George Clooney and Hollywood said that, yeah, the most popular candidate of all time must step down after he won his primary. So Trump simply voicing discontent or concerns or skepticism does not mean that Americans can't control themselves. Trump's supporters didn't shut down cities and issue curfews because of rampant, because of taking over the streets at night. Those were demonstrators left of center. But the narrative is Trump contested and didn't like losing to somebody who preemptively pardoned everyone around him and was forced out because everyone saw that he couldn't function, unfortunately. And so because Trump did that, that showed chaos and mayhem for one day in which one unarmed woman lost her life and 4 Trump supporters lost their lives.
And an unstable America after they were used in 2020.
It's sowing doubt because it's essentially saying there's a problem that needs to be fixed.
And that it won't be fixed. But it's all.
I believe that there might be a problem that needs to be fixed. Even George Clooney and Democrats believed that there was a problem with Biden that needed to be fixed. That's why they removed him in less than 4 years after he won in with the most support in U.S. history.
Also built on a pretty faulty foundation, Lindsay, that there's widespread voting by undocumented immigrants.
There need not be widespread. We see in North Carolina, there's less than 1,000, about 700 or so people. It doesn't have to be widespread. It could be a tiny, minuscule amount that impacts major contests. By the way, I think that these journalists are doing a great job. I'm simply giving a respectful rebuttal.
Which has never been proven in court. That's the impetus for this executive order. That's an argument that likely will be made if the 2026 elections don't go the way everybody wants them to go.
Have to be quick with you, but we've seen the president target law firms in executive actions. He did this in one against Chicago law firm Jenner and Block. Also singling out attorney Andrew Weissman. Catch us up to speed on why they've drawn his ire and the bigger picture.
4 major law firms now under.
So this is the Supreme Court candidate who could very likely win if the Democratic challenger in North Carolina can't prove that 65,000 supporters were eligible to back her.
The North Carolina Court of Appeals in 2020 by the voters of this state in a statewide election where I've served since then, authored over 200, close to 250 opinions of that court, ranging wide areas of the law, and have, I feel, provided a great service there. Prior to that, I was a district court judge. I was a trial court judge in Wake County, elected by the people in Wake County. I think that's a great perspective to add to the court. Notably, there's no former trial court judges on the Supreme Court now with Justice Morgan's resignation. So traveling the state, talking to trial court judges, going to their conferences, they want somebody on the bench who understands that we're not there to retry cases, reweigh the evidence. We're there to simply look at what's below and make sure there weren't any errors. And I think that's an added perspective. Prior to that, I was a prosecutor here in Wake County. I worked for Colin Willoughby, who was the elected DA then. Prosecuted cases from infractions to homicides, jury trials, bench trials. Worked in the busiest courthouse in the state and the busiest DA's office, and so great experience there. Prior to that, I was in private practice, did civil defense work, criminal defense work. Also, I mentioned I'm currently still in the Army National Guard here in North Carolina. I've served on active duty while mobilized. I'm currently the senior defense counsel for North Carolina, which is, I help soldiers who are going through some issues with our military justice system or administratively. I live in Carteret County full time. My courthouse is in Raleigh. My wife is a lawyer and a very good one. And we are blessed with 2 children, Jay and Annie, who are about 3 and 1 approximately.
We know Justice's right opinion.
So it seems like a wonderful candidate. I'm sure his competitor, the Democrat, is also a very wonderful woman, wonderful individual, wonderful human being, and a fantastic candidate. Let's go really quickly. Hold on one second. This is another recap of what's going on, influenced by President Trump's executive order.
Today, an appeals court ruled in favor of the Republican candidate for a spot on the state Supreme Court. So this is the race that just won't seem to end. We've been talking about it for months now. You got Jefferson Griffin on the right, trails Allison Riggs on the left there by 700 and something votes. He wants to make up the difference by tossing out 60,000 ballots with missing or incorrect voter information. He says that there are identification problems there with those ballots. And today, an appeals court agreed with him. They think those 60,000 voters should have to prove their identities now months after this election.
If there's missing or incorrect information, what is the rebuttal from Democrats? What possibly could be the rebuttal? If there were missing or incorrect information, and the Republican was the victor or winning, you better believe that, oh my God, it would be the end of the world.
I asked WRAL state government reporter Will Doran how that's going to work. All right, well, so let's get started with this. And I don't really want to focus on the politics of all this, but more about what this means for those 60,000 ballots and for the voters who cast those ballots. Now, the court didn't say that they should be thrown out, but they said instead that the voters should have to prove who they are and that they are who the ballots say that they are. How exactly are they going to make that work?
Yes, so the court ruled that there's a small number of people who are going to have their ballots thrown out no matter what. People who were born overseas but can vote in North Carolina because of their parents. But for 99% of the people being challenged here, yes, the court did say that they can fight this effort to throw out their ballots. They need to contact their county board of elections. Those officials will be able to fix the problems as long as you can prove your identity, like by showing your driver's license.
So how much time do they have to do this?
Well, you should do it immediately if you were on this list. You don't have to do it now. This ruling is still getting appealed. It's not going to go into effect immediately. But if this ruling does stand, it's only going to give people a few days to get everything fixed. So it makes sense to start getting things fixed now. And then even if Griffin ends up losing in the end, there's nothing stopping similar lawsuits like this in future elections. So if you're on this list, go get it fixed. Make sure your vote counts.
What about the people who can't get this fixed for a variety of reasons? Maybe somebody has passed away since they cast their ballot. Maybe somebody moved out of the state, moved out of the country. Maybe they're not paying attention to the news cycle. Will their vote simply not count?
That's a great question. People, if you see your friends or your family members on this list, definitely tell them. But for people like you mentioned, maybe they've died, they can't do this in time. That's going to be something for the State Board of Elections to figure out. This is going to go back to them eventually to kind of implement these rules, and there could always be more lawsuits about how they decide to handle that. So
exactly, and that makes it very difficult.
So there should be a process throughout this country, even though these contests are run by states. If you have a blue state, you'll have one party rule like you see in the West Coast. If you have blue states allowing people without undocumented living without any without any repercussions at all, allowing, because of moral reasons, to allow undocumented individuals there, and then not asking, okay, so that, if you think that's moral, okay, fine. But then there's the issue of, if you're a blue state and you allow millions upon millions of people to live there that don't have citizenship, and then if you have contests, local, state, federal contests where you don't ask anyone for the proof of citizenship, how do you know with certainty that the totals are accurate? And we're talking even within Democratic primaries, not just Democrat versus Republican. Okay? You don't know. The rebuttal is, well, it doesn't happen often. That's not, what does that have to do with the concern? Well, it's never been proven in court. There have been a number of cases. Well, actually, you could Bush v. Gore. So it has been proven, or there have been court cases in 2000, for example, where the Democrat lost. And you could say, well, that was just, they're still saying Bush cheated. To this day, there are Democrats saying Bush cheated, and then they say in the same breath, but there's no evidence of widespread misconduct. Because they perhaps have done worse or the same for the past 20 plus years. But the issue is there has to be some standard. You can't have your cake and eat it too if you're this wonderful, morally superior, highly educated liberal Democrat, who, by the way, cheats Bernie Sanders and Biden. I mean, these are the same individuals who talk about democracy. Where's the democracy within the Democratic Party? It's not. They don't even have a primary is supposed to pick the best Democrat. If that happens to be Bernie Sanders or AOC, then why refuse their victory? Why prevent them from being victorious like they did with Bernie Sanders in 2016 if you care so much about democracy and counting and not disenfranchising people? And how many voters were disenfranchised when Biden, who won his primary, how many millions of people voted for Biden in the 2024 Democratic primary? Were they disenfranchised? And I mean, these are simple questions to ask. Were the people who chose Biden in the Democratic primary, were they disenfranchised? Or is it a complete and utter racket where only George Clooney and Hollywood can allow us to believe our lying eyes? But let's continue.
To determine when this all will be over, because this is not the end, essentially. Riggs always could appeal, for instance, which she likely will. Also, there's the federal version of this case. So can you give us an idea of what is next?
Yes, this case is still going to be winding its way through the court system. This was just a 3-judge panel at the Court of Appeals. Justice Riggs could ask the entire 15-person court to take that up. She could also go back to the Supreme Court, where there would be 6 justices voting on it because she's recused herself from that. So
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's very, very interesting. This will be the first, I think, test of President Trump's executive order. And I think that, by the way, subscribe to The Federalist. It's a wonderful publication. It's awesome. This is very interesting. I just don't understand why there's no rebuttal other than a very petulant, disingenuous rebuttal. Well, there's no, there's no widespread. I mean, how much can you parse your words? There's no widespread during an eclipse, standing on one foot while juggling bowling pins and singing the national anthem of another country. Fraud, nationally fraud found. It's like you just need you just need an example of fraud to then say, oh, okay, let's fix this. Why would widespread criminality warrant? Why would only widespread criminality warrant laws preventing people who are not eligible from choosing local, state, and federal contests? Why would you need widespread criminality? Why not just, there's enough for close contests to go to the Democrat or to the Republican? I mean, aren't Democrats worried that people who are not documented might vote Republican? Have you ever heard that before? Hit subscribe if that's the first time you've ever heard that. Aren't Democrats worried that people who are not documented might vote Republican or Trump? I guess that's not a concern. I don't know why. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel. I will see you tonight. Be here for the live stream this evening. By the way, I had a fantastic live stream last night on Trump's tariffs and why they're absolutely wonderful and very important for the country. and why they're pretty much undoing the Democratic Party, which is in free fall right now. Hit subscribe to my super chat. Thank you. I'll see